All right, guys. Well, good morning again to you. I'm Donnie. I'm one of the pastors here at One Harbor, and we're so glad you're here. If it's your first time with us, welcome. We are in a series right now through a book of the Bible called Nehemiah. Nehemiah is a tiny little book in the Old Testament, and it doesn't get a lot of airplay. And so if you are kind of new to the Bible, just checking out Christianity, you've never heard of Nehemiah before, hey, that checks out. I would understand that. If you've been in church a long time and never heard Nehemiah preached on a Sunday morning, I won't ask for a show of hands, but again, I would say that kind of checks out. It doesn't get talked about a whole lot. When it does get talked about, it gets used for building projects for churches because it's about rebuilding this wall, and it's a good one if you need to raise a bunch of money and build some stuff. And I'm not saying it's bad, but that's just pretty much where Nehemiah lives. As far as getting talked about, preached on Sunday mornings. But man, it is like full of so much more than that. And so we're not doing another building project. That's not what we're talking about, Nehemiah. We're talking about it because it's in the Bible. And, in the story of Nehemiah is a story of God rebuilding the wall around the city of Jerusalem. And then there's corresponding other stories like Ezra where they're rebuilding the temple. All this had been destroyed, and so God brings back exiles. He brings them back together. He rebuilds the wall through the story of Nehemiah. And why it's important to us, aside from it being just in the Bible, and these are part of our ancestors in the faith, another reason this is really important to us and what we've spent our time kind of thinking about in this series is because the New Testament tells us that the church, that's us, that's all of us, we are the New Jerusalem. And so when we look at the story of what God did through Jerusalem, and we see what God had in mind for Jerusalem in the Old Testament, it's supposed to give us key clues onto how do we work this out? What does it mean for us to be the church? And so essentially in the Old Testament, Jerusalem was a couple of things. I mean, it was lots of things, but just boiling it down, it was a safe place where God's people could do life together, where they could worship their God together, they could dwell together, they could care for one another and serve one another and all those things. They could dwell together. It was a safe place for God's people to do that. And the city of Jerusalem was meant to be a beautiful witness to a watching world of what God was like. That is the same thing when you fast forward to the New Testament. That's what the church is supposed to be. A safe place for God's people to dwell, to worship, to care for one another, to be strengthened, to use their gifts, all that stuff. Yep. And we're supposed to be a beautiful witness to a watching world of what our God is like. Jesus said it like this. He said, you'll be a city set on a hill. You would shine your light into the darkness. Okay, and so we're digging into Nehemiah, we're looking at it, and we're trying to see how do we make these connections? How do we, as a church here at One Harbor, thousands and thousands of years later, how can we learn from what's happening in this story so that we can be the church that Jesus wants us to be? So far in the story, Nehemiah, he leaves his role it's a privileged role of being the wine taster or the cupbearer for this king Artaxerxes in Persia. He travels some 800 miles. He surveys the damage of the wall being all broken down, the gates being burned down. He rallies the troops. They start working together. They face opposition outside. They face opposition inside. And in chapter 6, verse 15, they finally finish rebuilding the wall. But the story goes on. And so today we're picking up and we see people beginning to come back and actually live in the city. Now, I'm going to read to you, as we always do, from this passage before we just dive into the sermon. But I want to tell you that there's some verses missing, verse 8 through 65. And some of you are very astute, and you would pick up on that if I didn't draw attention to it, and you would email me later. And so I'm just going to run to that right now. I'm skipping them because they're full of crazy names that I can barely pronounce, all right? I know that makes it sound like I'm a coward, but I'm up here with a microphone, and it's kind of tough. So I'm going to sum it up for you, verse 8 through 65. Families, tribes, priests, leaders, you're welcome. Okay? That is it. Now, we will draw attention to them. We will give dignity to them, but I'm not going to waste your time me trying to read all those names. It's a lot. You can go home and have fun and do it yourself. Here we go. Nehemiah chapter 7, verse 1. Now, when the wall had been built, and I'd set up the doors, and the gatekeepers and the singers and the Levites had been appointed, I gave my brother Hananiah, the governor of the castle, charge over Jerusalem, for he was a more faithful and God-fearing man than many. And I said to them, let not the gates of Jerusalem be opened until the sun is hot, and while they're still standing guard, let them shut and bar the doors. Appoint guards from among the inhabitants of Jerusalem, some at their guard posts and some in front of their own homes. The city was large and wide, but the people within it were few, and no houses had been rebuilt. Then my God put it into my heart. I love these moments in the story. It's like he's describing what's happening, then you see God step in, right? God then put it into my heart. To do what? To assemble the nobles and the officials and the people to be enrolled by genealogy. And I found the book of the genealogy of those who had come up at first. This is some 90 years this book had been not been referenced. He said, I found written in it, these are the people of the province who came up out of captivity, of those exiles whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried into exile. They returned to Jerusalem and Judah, each to his town. They came with Zerubbabel and Jeshua and Nehemiah and Azariah and Rahamiah and Nahamani and Mordecai and Bilshan and Mispereth and Bigvai and Nahum and Bahanah. Verse 66. The whole assembly together was 42,360, besides their male and female servants, of whom there were 7,377. And they had 245 singers, male and female. Their horses were 736, their mules 245, their camels 435, their donkeys 6,720. Now some of the heads of the fathers' houses gave to the work. The governor gave to the treasury 1,000 derricks of gold, 50 basins, 30 priest garments, and 500 minas of silver. Some of the heads of the fathers' houses gave into the treasury of the work 20,000 derricks of gold, 2,200 minas of silver. And what the rest of the people gave was 20,000 derricks of gold, 2,000 minas of silver, and 67 priest garments. So the priests, the Levites, the gatekeepers, the singers, some of the people, the temple servants, and all Israel lived in their towns. And when the 7th month had come, the people of Israel were in their towns. Wow, that was a lot. Basically, Nehemiah's finished the work of rebuilding the wall, but then he turns to filling the city. He gets out this old list of names. You can see a similar list in Ezra chapter 2, and he starts there. Now, I will just say, I'll admit it, if you were reading this, if you're trying to read through the Bible in a year, or you're doing your morning devotional and you read this chapter, I would understand if you read it and you're like, I don't know, what do I get out of this? Even hearing me read it, you're like, where is he going with this? Donkeys and camels and what is there possibly here, right? And I actually did some homework and realized that not a lot of times when people preach through this series, they kind of just do a drive-by on Nehemiah chapter 7, or they skip it all together. Jump right to chapter 8. There's some, more sort of easy to, get your head around passages there. But this is God's word, and it always has something to say to us, right? Right? All right, cool. We're going to say right. It's there. It's God's word. And so, you can get so much out of this passage. With Nehemiah, there's always great stuff on leadership. If you want to grow as a leader, it's an excellent book. You see him appointing leaders. You see him caring about safety for the city. You see all this stuff. The wall has been built, but the leadership problems are still there. Corruption, oppression, politicking, all that stuff. It never ends. You always need good leaders. There's life lesson stuff you could get out of this. There's so much stuff. But remember what we're trying to do. We're trying to look at this and go, how does this help us learn how to be a better church? That's the point of this series. How do we look at this ancient story, this tiny story in the Old Testament, and how does it help us? How do we be a better church? And by better church, what do I mean? How do we look more like what Jesus has in mind? That makes it a better church, right? What does Jesus have in mind? So let's dive in and let's see what we can learn. Okay, firstly, this call for people to live there. The city was wide and large, verse 4, but the people within it were few, and no houses had been rebuilt. Then God put it into my heart. The city's, it's there, it's got its walls, it's got its, Nehemiah could just go, right, back to my wine tasting job. That was a lot easier than this mess. No, at that point, God steps in and puts something else on Nehemiah's heart, right? What are we seeing here? We're seeing God doesn't just want a wall built, he wants a people to dwell together. God doesn't just want a wall built, he wants the people to dwell together. We say this a lot, but it bears repeating that churches are not buildings. When you drive through these little towns in North Carolina, these little podunk little towns, and you're like, oh, look at all the church buildings. Or look at all the churches. What you really mean is look at all the buildings where churches meet. Jesus didn't die for buildings. He died for a body of believers. He died for people, right? And so like an empty church is not the goal, an empty city wasn't the goal. God didn't just want his people to have a nice city they could visit on Sundays and Wednesday nights and then just go live their individualistic lives. He wanted them to dwell together. And this gets at the heart of one of, I think, maybe the biggest challenge us together have in our modern moment, living in America, living in the West, living in the time with all this technology and social media and all this stuff. One of our biggest, if not our biggest challenge to actually getting out of church what Jesus had in mind is individualism. Individualism is not what God ever intended for his people. God is not into architecture. He's into his people being together, right? And it was true for them who've been hauled off into exile, and it's true for us who have been hauled off into isolation and individualism. If you think about human history, for the most part, people have thought it was a good idea to dwell together. Now you get the exceptions, living in the woods, you see the woman and the kids and the dog and me. Well, Hank Williams Jr., for any of y'all who might catch that reference. Some of you are nodding your heads, fellow sinners. But most people throughout human history have found it advantageous to dwell nearby other people. When you think about when people settled here, pioneering across the West, they traveled together, most of them, the ones who were likely to survive, right? Because it's dangerous. There's all kinds of challenges and dangers. And if you traveled together and you dwelt together and you camped together, you could rely on each other. You could use each other's different talents and abilities. And that's just part of human history is this, reality that together we're a bit stronger, But in our modern moment, we have elevated individualism to the highest pinnacle of what we're all trying to achieve. And all of that desire to live like our own little personal islands has left us to be the most lonely, depressed, anxious generation in human history. But from the very beginning in the Bible, in the Garden of Eden, God said, it's not good for man to be alone. It's not good for man to be alone. Individualism is not what God ever intended for his people. That's how the Bible begins. And by the way, the Bible ends with God's people all dwelling together, all of us, for all of eternity in God's holy city. God's not into us being by ourselves, like in isolation. He calls his people not just to love him and depend on him, but to love and depend on one another. God's idea of what we should be living, how we should be living together is interdependent, not independent. Now again, I'm American. I love that our Declaration of Independence, and I love our value of independence. But we have to be very careful, friends, that we don't impose a cultural value, even if it's a good one, on top of Jesus' kingdom. When we look at the city of Jerusalem, we're getting a sense of what God has in mind for us. I mean, this city served a purpose. It was a place to belong, a place where your name mattered, a place where your gifts could be used, where you could be safe and cared for, and you could follow God alongside others, and you could be a witness to the world. And friends, it's exactly what God has in mind for his church today. God's people were and still are meant to dwell in God's holy city, a city, Jesus said, set on a hill. The one who dwelt with us, we talk about it at Christmas, Jesus being Emmanuel, with us the God who dwelt with us, the God who values being with us so much that he came down and put skin on. This is a God who values community. He who dwelt with us doesn't envision us living in isolation. And I just honestly think that one of the reasons we don't get very much out of church or very much out of following Jesus, like, it's just not really working for me. Isn't really doing what I thought it was. I think a lot of the reason that we have so much disappointment around church is because of our very individualistic approach. A couple months back, I think it was, I feel like I'm always pulled in a bunch of different directions. I'm always stretched, and I've got two little kids. We're not little anymore, but they're little enough. And I'm busy, job's busy, all the stuff's busy. And I was just like, man, I want to just go spend some time just praying. I want to do some fasting. I just want to have some solitude. And I was so desperate. I'd heard a few of my friends had done this. I was so desperate, I went to a Benedictine monastery and checked myself in for a few days. That was a very different cultural experience for me. If you want silence, you got it. They will not talk to you. They just nod and go back to working with the bees, and making fudge. That's what they made there, fudge. It was very disorientating for me. I mean, just even The facility that you go in for the services, it's like straight out of Harry Potter, just ginormous. And you stand up at certain times and sit down at certain times. I didn't know what those times were. I got it really wrong. At one point, I've been standing up for like 10 minutes, and I think everyone else had sat down. It was just disorientating. But man, you know what? The most disorientating thing about it was watching the way that these guys were community for one another. I was like, there's something really different about this. They are like committed to one another for life. Benedict had, one of his rules was to put death before you every day. And so they covenant when they join this monastery to die on the premises. So if you get in a fight with somebody, you better work it out. Because it ain't like you can go next door next Sunday. Like, this is your people. You're going to die with them, like next to them, And so they have a series of graves on the property, and it's all the people who've been at this monastery died. And then there's an empty grave. There's like a cross without a name on it, so that every day you are putting death before you. Every day you're walking by going, that could be me, or that could be you, or that could be you. It's like you're thinking about this group of people, one of us is going to be in that hole pretty soon. It's crazy. They're like radical commitment to one another. Now, don't worry, I'm not suggesting we all start putting a bunch of graves out back and all that. I'm not saying that all of us should go live in a monastery, but I walked away thinking, man, we need more of that. There's something about that we are missing. Our very individualistic approach of customizing every little thing about church just for me, so it's just about me, and it's all about me. Gosh, I got to feel that there's something about that we should be learning from. And let's just talk about what that could maybe look like. I think, like we see in this passage, there's all those names. There's like they were given a place. I mean, like the city of Jerusalem, I think the church here, we're meant to be a place to belong. We're meant to be a place to belong. Anyone who was found in that book that Nehemiah found had a place and had an inheritance. All those names that we skipped, you know why they're not that important to us? Because your name's not on that list. Like if your name had been on that list and I was like, you know what, we're going to skip these lists, crazy bunch of names. Whoa. My name's not that crazy. You better read that list. That's the best part. My name's right there. They would be outraged we skipped their names, right? Their names represented real people, and we want to give them dignity. Just because their names are hard to pronounce and we're not reading them now doesn't mean that they don't warrant dignity. These were people who had lost everything through severe trauma. They had been ripped away from their homes. They had been carried off into exile to serve as slaves in foreign lands under foreign kings, worshiping foreign gods, eating foreign foods, foreign customs, never thinking they would ever return. But God, their God, had not forgotten his promises to them. He had a plan for them, and his plan was to bring them back together and put them into community, give them a place to belong. What does that have to do with the local church today? Everything. That's exactly what we are. The church is meant to be a place to belong and a place to be known. In Psalm 68, it says that God, our God, settles the solitary in a home. Another way to say that is, our God puts lonely people into families. That's what local church is, a family. It's the family of God. God puts us, he pulls us out of isolation, out of individualism, and puts us into his family. In fact, if you want to know a bit about how your progress is going as a follower of Jesus, if you're growing more and more isolated, you're heading in the wrong direction. Because God knits us together with one another. He puts us into community, puts us into family. Into a family where our names and our stories matter. If you are just checking this whole thing out, not sure you believe any of this, can I just tell you something crazy? God knows you. First name, last name, middle name, nickname, knows everything about you. Knows how many hairs on your head, knows how many tears you've ever cried, knows everything about you. You matter to him. Your name matters to him. In John 10, Jesus calls himself the good shepherd of the sheep. It says that he knows the sheep. He lays down his life for his sheep, but he's not just saying sheep plural. He then says he calls them out by name. In Luke 10:20, the disciples are told to rejoice that their names were written in heaven. In Revelation 21, Jesus, the King of Kings, ruling over the heavenly Jerusalem, it says that everyone who's there, quote, has their name written in the Lamb's book of life. Their names mattered in the story, and your name matters. Your name matters to God. It matters. And God's plan for you is to put you into a family where your name and your story matters, where you can be known and where you can belong. And friends, this is it's what all humans crave. It's what all humans crave. There was a show, I'll date myself, back in when I was younger, I don't know, called Cheers. And it was about this bar in a big city. And this little bar, the theme song went like this. Sometimes you want to go where everybody knows your name and they're always glad you came. A lot of you are like, oh yeah, it's going to be in my head for a month now. Thanks a lot. What's the point? Well, they're in a city, but they're still craving community. And they found it at a little bar where everyone knew everybody, and they were just like, that's what humans want. And you think about this with cities. It's full of people who've moved away from their little homes and their hometowns, and they've moved into this big city for this big dream, and they're profoundly lonely. And they're desperate for community. And they just want to go somewhere where somebody knows them. That's what humans want. And that's what God does with the church. He puts us into a family. It's why we do this terrible thing the introverts all hate, where we say, turn and greet someone around you. We try to make it short, right? We know it's like torture for you, but it's important. It's why we have a lobby that big. What's the point of this big old lobby? If we could think about all the seats we could put if we blew this wall out. Yeah, but that just treats us like an event. The lobby shows that we're trying to be a bit of a family. We want areas for you to sit down and talk with each other and have coffee and encourage one another, pray with one, whatever. That's why we do community groups, because we're trying to be the family of God. It's not just the Old Testament that are a list of names. The New Testament's got lists too. Romans 16, 1 through 16 is just a bunch of names. Paul lists and says, this is my family. She was like a mom to me. They're like cousins to me. They're kin to me. They're like brothers and sisters to me. That's the local church should not, say it slowly, should not feel like an event. This should not feel like an event you attend. Like in Nehemiah, God brings us who are far off, and he brings us together. He brings us near, and he makes us his people. Ephesians tells us that we, the Gentiles, we were separated and alienated strangers. Here, how isolated were we? It says, having no hope and without God in the world. That's pretty isolated. But what happened? Christ Jesus brought us who were far off, he brought us near by the blood of Christ. It's a place to belong. It's a place to be known. That combats individualism. When we see that this is what local church should feel like. Now, that's good. It's a lot about us and what we get. There's a couple other things here that we should look and see quickly. Verse 70 through 71, it says, the heads of the father's houses gave to the work. The heads of the father's houses gave into the treasury of the work. And then the rest of the people gave. See the pattern? Everyone gave something, right? And so while church is a place for you to be blessed and you to be received and you to belong and you to be known, and all that is true, you be built up and encouraged and strengthened, yes, 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 it's also a place, just like that city, where everyone gives and plays their part. That is how the body functions properly. We are receiving from each other and we are contributing. And this chapter highlights how everyone gave something. They gave, be it money or goods or support, whatever, they're giving towards this work of renewal. And it's another picture of what the church should be. Everyone depending on one another, yes, but also everyone saying, hey, you can depend on me. And sometimes we only get that first half of the equation. Oh, I want church because I want. And that's not bad, that's great. If you're here because, man, you're busted up, you're hurt, great, we're glad you're here. But that's only half of the equation. That's not a healthy relationship when it's just about what you and I need individually, right? When we really understand local church, when we go, hey, this is about everyone being able to depend on others and everyone being able to depend on me. Again, it's interdependent, not independent. I think a challenge is that for us to get the most out of church, you have to believe you actually need others. And individualism tells you don't. You can dip in and out of an event like this or of a relationship, or you can YouTube whatever you want. We live like we don't really need anybody else. Gone are the days where we really needed each other. But the Bible tells us we do need each other. That what I have, you need. And that I need to do my part in making sure I give whatever, I'm dependable. I'm someone who I give what I've got to help you. And that you've got something I need, right? Tom always describes this in our partnership classes. He talks about how, what's in my fridge is in yours and your fridge is in mine. And, makes this whole, so we're going to all come to your house today for lunch kind of thing, right? There is that sort of thing, which we go, hey, look, I need you, but guess what? You can depend on me too. You can count on me. 1 Peter 4, there's so many examples of this, but as each has received a gift, that is, when you become a follower of Jesus, you by the Spirit are given gifts. God gives you these gifts. It says use it to serve one another. Why? Because you want to be good stewards of God's very grace. What does that mean? That means if you have a gift, you do, by the way, if you're a follower of Jesus, you have a gift, and he lists them here like speaking or serving. There's other lists like this, 1 Corinthians 12 and Romans 12 and Ephesians 4. If you need help kind of figuring out what is my gift, that's a great conversation to have with a community group leader or a pastor or something. We'd love to come alongside you and help you with that. But the point is, once you go, okay, I've got a gift. Okay, if you're not, just taking this verse at its plain, face value, if you're not using it to serve others, if you're not right now using your gift to serve one another, according to this text, you're not being a good steward of what God has given you. That's just something that should warrant our attention. Always when these gifts are spoken about, there's this kind of corporate responsibility we have to, one way it's described as mutually strengthen one another. One of the number one ways that our individualism ruins church is it turns all of us into a bunch of consumers. Now, consuming isn't bad. We want you to consume. You're consuming right now. And that's okay. That's a good thing. We want you to consume, but we don't want to be just consumers. Now, again, if you're brand new, we're not expecting anything of you. We're glad you're here. Just have a seat, relax. How can we serve you? Put your feet up, If you're busted up, hurting, life is hell right now. You barely crawled in the door this morning, or you couldn't even make it in. You're watching. Hey, listen, we're not trying to say, come on, man, do your part, toe the line. No. How can we serve you? How can we help? But that's just the new people and the people really busted up. That should leave the majority of us going, how can we play our part? How can we contribute? I think that individualism is at the center of so many of our bad experiences around church. And I guess I want to leave us with this kind of thought, what if this wasn't an event to attend? If you didn't have free time and, the tide wasn't just right for going out on the boat, which, by the way, it kind of is right now. So props to you guys. Well done. Okay? You could have been somewhere else. But what if this wasn't just an event to attend? What if something more was happening when we got together? What if when we came together, just hear me out, it was to rebuild and renew? They had such a clear purpose. Come together, rebuild. It's easy when there's a giant wall we're trying to work on together, but what if there was something that is actually getting built here? Something eternal. And what if you have a role to play in it? I honestly think that the church is at its best when everyone has this, quote, spirit to rebuild. Where am I getting that from? Well, this list that Nehemiah looks at in verse 5, this list of those who come up at the first, it says, who were those first people? Well, we read about them in Ezra chapter 1, verse 5. It says that it wasn't just a bunch of warm bodies. It says it was, quote, everyone whose spirit God had stirred up to go and rebuild. Friends, when the room is largely full of people who are going, hey, I'm here to build up, that is a pretty beautiful thing. That is a pretty beautiful thing. These people were captivated by what God had in mind. What if the majority of us on a Sunday morning came in here and were like, hey, I'm trying to build something here. I want this to be a safe place for God's people to dwell. I want this to be a beautiful witness to a watching world. I've got a role to play. I've got gifts to use. I've got something I can do. What if most of us came into the room and we acted like that? Like, what if, the language the New Testament uses a lot is this idea of being built up. We were built up. They were built up. What if you thought that's part of your job is to build up? Not just my job, not just the guys on stage, the guys on staff. What if that was part of your job? What would that even look like? Well, what if you didn't judge Sunday morning just based on you got the seat you wanted, coffee was pretty good, kids ministry check-in, went off without a hitch. Worship was great. Sermon, a little bit, but, it was a bunch of names. Let's cut him some slack. What if we didn't judge church based on that? Like, that's a successful Sunday. Woo, got in, got a seat, got a parking spot, dropped the kids off, coffee great, worship great, woo, got fed. Hashtag blessed. What if that's not what we judge? And again, I'm not discounting those things. I mean, I hope worship's good, and we sincerely try for the sermons to be good. Believe it or not, we do. We sincerely try for all these things. We work so hard to do all that stuff. I'm not discounting it. I'm just adding, I want to add one more metric for you if you're part of this church. I want to give you one thing I would like you to forever think about when you come together. One more thing that makes this successful. Did you build anybody else up? I hope you're built up. I hope you're strengthened. I hope you're encouraged. I hope you're filled. I hope you're blessed. I hope all of that. Every single time, I hope all of it. But did you play a part in that for anybody else? Now, you play it just by being in the room, whether you know it or not. Just you being in the room is an encouragement, is a blessing to others. Just you worshiping. You don't know what the person beside you is going through. All these, you're doing it already. But can I add to that and say, hey, what if you looked around the room on Sundays instead of elbowing people for your favorite seat? I mean, nobody would do that, but maybe. What if you looked around and thought, okay, who is it that I don't know? I want to go meet them. I want to see if I can build them up. Or gosh, man, they look a little off today. Something's amiss. I'm just going to rather than go, oh, having a bad day, I'm going to draw close to them and go, hey, what's going on? What's going on? How can I build you up? Or, man, I've seen them in 3 months. Okay, let's go. I'm sick them. Go get them. Build them up, I don't mean sick them. That came out wrong. But what if the most of us thought, hey, when we head to our car to go home, that was part of this being a successful Sunday morning. Worship, coffee, kids, preach, blah, 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 and I got to build somebody up. Friends, I don't know what you think. That feels really beautiful to me. That feels really beautiful to me. It feels like the kind of church that Jesus has in mind. I'm going to tell you that you're going to need some challenges like that. You're going to need something like that. To swim against individualism is like trying to fight a rip current. I don't know if you've ever been stuck in a rip. I have, almost drowned. I've growing up here being a surfer, I've rescued people out of a lot of rips. It is dangerous. It is scary. It's terrifying. And that's the reason we teach our kids to look for the rip and swim this way and all those things, right? If you're going to swim against the rip tide of individualism, you're going to need some rules. You're going to need to think about it. When you come into the room, you're going to kick into consumer mode unless you've got some hey, I don't want to get sucked into that rip. What am I going to do different? You're going to need some things I'm going to make sure I build somebody up. I got to build up 3 people this Sunday. I did 2 last week. Whatever it is, you're going to need some of that. Lastly, verse 4 says, the city was wide and large, but the people within it were few. Something about that just makes me go, gosh, yes. We're to be so glad for who's here, and we're to, this side of heaven, keep longingly hoping, God, put more people into your family. Think about the people you go to school with, kids who sit around you. My kids are in 4th grade and 6th grade, and I tell them every single day when I take them to school, you're sitting around kids whose lives, some of them are just hell. You don't know what's going on in their lives, man. But you know Jesus. You have an opportunity. Think about the kids around you. Think about your coworkers. You think about your neighbors. You think about just the people you do life around, your family members, people in their communities. And we just read that verse and go, Lord, we want to say, God, just fill this church, fill us, we want to see more people added to your family, Lord. Let's longingly hope for more and more to be added. As the band comes up, if you're here and you're not yet a follower of Jesus, There is you might have heard of this actually. There is a list, we referenced it earlier, called the Lamb's Book of Life. And the Bible makes it really clear that those who actually enter heaven are those whose names are on a list. And if you're not yet a follower of Jesus, that means your name's not on that list. But how do you get on that list? I mean, what would you have to do to get on that list? Well, Jesus says, as far as who can be on that list, he uses words like this: whoever. Other places he says anyone. Now he says things like whoever hungers and thirsts. He says anyone who's tired, who's heavily burdened. His qualifications for who gets on that list are people who've gotten to the point where they're just desperate and they need help. They need help and they need him. And they come to him and they say, Jesus, I've got nothing in and of myself. I need you. Save me, forgive me, heal me, change me, love me, put my name on that list. That's how you get on that list. That's how you get that on the list. Is you don't treat this like I got to go learn 5 tips on how to have a better marriage. My wife said I got to be here. Whatever it is, you come and you say, Jesus, I need you. Jesus said when you come to him, you find rest for your soul. Come to the one who knows your name, who knows your story, the one who has a plan. If that's you this morning, we're going to throw up a slide. It's got a prayer you can pray. You can pray a version of this. Just put in your own words if you want to. It's just us trying to help you. This is a lifelong journey to follow Jesus, but the first step is you surrendering to Jesus. So if that's you, you can pray some version of that prayer. You can stop listening to me. You can focus on that. We'd love it if you would just indicate on this connection card, man, I decided to follow Jesus today, or just come up and grab us at the end. We'd love a chance to talk with you, get alongside you, get to know you, hear your story, figure out how we can help you. We're so glad you're here. For the rest of us who are already followers of Jesus, I bet all of us to some degree felt a little sting this morning, like, oh gosh, kind of falling into individualism, or man, I'm a bit of a consumer. I don't know if I really thought about building anybody else up. I'm just kind of like glad I made it on time or got a seat or whatever. Look, I'm not trying to beat you up. I'm trying to invite you to see there's more. I know for me, when I drift into like individualism and selfishness and consumerism, it's because I've drifted away from something else. I've drifted away from grace and mercy. You know why you, as a follower of Jesus, have a place, an inheritance that the New Testament tells us we have. This inheritance we have. Why we have a place, we have it because our name is on a list. That's why they had it. They had a place to belong, and they had an inheritance because their name was on a list. Well, same's true for us, but do you know how your name got on that list? Well, the kicker is it had nothing to do with you. Ephesians 2, by grace you've been saved through faith, not your own doing. It's a gift of God, not a result of works that no one may boast. So when you come to this meal here in just a moment, it's a powerful meal. It can do lots of things. I mean, it can do nothing if you just sort of going through the motions, but it can be really powerful. It can reconnect you. It can remind you. It can do all kinds of things. And I want to just suggest this morning as we're thinking about how do we move away from individualism? How can we appreciate the family of God more? How can we build it? How can we do that stuff more? I want to just remind you that every single person you're going to brush shoulders with as you come up and take this meal, all of you have so many things not in common. You live in very different homes. You have different bank accounts. Your stories are crazy different. You have different jobs. You're different ages. You have different ethnicities. There's so many differences. One thing you will all 100% have in common when you come take this meal is not a single one of you deserve it. Nobody deserves this meal. It's a gift of grace. It's a meal of grace. And there's something so unifying about that. You brush shoulders with each other and you go, hey, somebody else whose name was on a list and they didn't deserve to be on that list either. Just like me, just like me, just like you, just like you. There's something so powerful about that. All of us have our names written in Jesus' book. All of us, our stories matter to him. For all of us, Jesus wants to bring us together so that we can be known, so we can belong, so that we can serve and give, so this can be a safe place for God's people to dwell and a beautiful witness to the world. Jesus, bless this time. Bless us now as we come to this table. Thank you that your real presence is with us. We ask, God, that you would help us. Some of us are stuck in a rip. We're getting sucked out to sea, the sea of individualism and isolation and consumerism, and we need your help. Sincerely, we pray, we need your help. As we come this meal, Lord, let us remember your body broken for us, your blood shed for us. What a dramatic thing you did to rescue us, to bring us not just to yourself, but to bring us to each other. God, help us not take it lightly as we come take this meal. In Jesus' name. Guys, there's volunteers around the room to help you with how we're gonna take the meal, and then we're gonna sing one last song together.